Broadcasting from Silicon Valley, California, this is Conversations with Jennylyn.
Guess where we are today? We are in Estonia. And this is my very first interview with anyone living there. My guest today is originally from a different country. He'll tell us that in this interview, but is currently living in Estonia and doing amazing things there. His name is Calum Cameron, and he is with Accelerate Estonia. And that's what I can't wait to hear, what that is, and a little bit about COVID in Estonia. And hopefully it's good news and it's finished. Welcome to my show, Calum.
Thank you very much, Jennylyn. Really happy to be here.
I am so excited to have you because I am trying to interview someone in as many countries as possible. And so today we get to hit the mark with you, and I'm so thrilled that you were able to spare the time. You're from Australia, and you live now in Estonia. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how you got there?
No, sure. I guess you can hit two new countries with one stone there. Oh, you said you've probably spoken with Australians. I just got lucky, I guess. When I was in my sort of late teens, early 20s, I did lots of backpacking around the world. Early 90s, I happened to be passing through Estonia and just fell in love with the place. Fell in love with the people and then a particular person. And then history took its course from there. So we moved back here from London, or actually Luxembourg by then, in 2007, I guess. And after a period of jumping backwards and forwards between here and London on contracts, IT contracts, mainly with banks, I've stayed here, or we've been based here in Tallinn for, I guess since 2010-11.
Wow. How quickly time passes when you're having fun.
Isn't it just that? Mm-hmm.
So are you currently working with the government of Estonia?
That's right. So a lot of the work I do these days is finding ways for people to create, to try new ideas and to actually participate in building a better society, and hopefully, if it's not too cheesy, a better world that comes out of it, right? And the government's public sector carries a lot of power. They have the opportunity to create really system-wide changes, but often they don't have the opportunity to think creatively. So right now I am working with the Estonian government in a program called Accelerate Estonia, which is a program that comes out of the Ministry for Economics here. The idea being that by working with entrepreneurs, the government can actually combine that creativity and that systemic awareness and systemic power to actually make changes that couldn't happen if either of them tried to take them on alone.
So is it similar to what we call an accelerator here?
Good point. It's unfortunately, the name is accurate based on our mission. It's to accelerate Estonia, but unfortunately, it does confuse people into thinking it's a startup accelerator. It's not a startup accelerator. It's not a startup incubator. The big difference is if you go into a startup accelerator, for example, you'll be looking to follow a program, lots of content, lots of coaching, and normally it's sort of blocked by about 3 months, something like this, that you do that. And it's normally for earlier stage teams as well. So you'd be looking for pre-seed, seed stage teams, maybe slightly later, but not much beyond that. With Accelerate Estonia, it's all very much focused on trying to identify what are the big changes that need to be tested to say that if they prove to be true, if this assumption proves to be true, that actually we can catalyze much bigger change across society and across the world. If we can, for example, find a solution to creating circular food production, so any sort of waste streams coming out of homes, restaurants, so forth, actually go back into farmers' fields to replace synthetic fertilizers and then provide more nutritious food that goes back to our plates and so forth. So if we can work out, is there one or just a few really specific changes that we can make and prove here in Estonia, that the rest of the world can take that as a proof of concept and go, that's how you do it. And so Accelerate Estonia is then focused on working with teams to pilot whatever these specific system-wide changes are that need somebody with an entrepreneurial mindset, with access throughout the public sector, and also the private sector, but need the public sector to enact, basically to give them the space in which to do it. And again, as it might be regulatory changes, it might be actually just saying, giving them the seal of approval, saying this is trusted. Farmers, you can try this, it should be all right.
That's great. So there's so much innovation in the world. And for a long time, we carried this chip on our shoulders, like, we are the tech capital of the world. I heard this a lot in conversation. And now everybody is involved with their own innovation. Here in the Silicon Valley, where I live, it's mostly tech. What type of innovation do you find the most of based on what you're doing in Estonia? What's the focus on?
Well, look, Estonia is also, from the startup ecosystem, is primarily tech. In fact, one of our unicorns has just become a decacorn, listing as for 10 billion on the London stock market today, or stock exchange today.
Congratulations.
So massive excitement around the country with that one. So Estonia has traditionally for the last 20 odd years, been focused very heavily on tech. So things like Skype, TransferWise, one who went out there today, Bolt, who I guess you probably haven't heard a lot about in the US.
Which one? Sorry?
Bolt.
No, I haven't heard of it.
And they're basically Europe's Uber killer. So they are out competing Uber across most of Europe. They pretty much, they're prevalent across Africa and so forth. So again, these are tech or tech-enabled startups. With Accelerate Estonia, it doesn't have to be tech. And in fact, whilst I'd love tech to be in there, quite often when it comes to these really wicked problems, by definition, they can't be solved by tech, because tech is often solved sort of binary problems. Wicked problems tend to have lots of human elements to them and lots of social elements to them. You can't just go and, the solution is not the platform or whatever in there. So we'd like to work with teams who definitely have tech solutions, but the barrier is actually somewhere else within the system that we can help them overcome.
So I know that in the US, a lot of startup companies, they seek capital from VCs or angel, whoever is willing or who buys into what they're doing and is willing to invest in them. Does your government finance a lot of these startups, or is it a similar concept to the Silicon Valley? And I want to tell you, I did not do a lot of research on Estonia because I like to have conversations, and if I know too much information, I need to ask pertinent questions, and I want it all to come out in my interviews. So I did not do a whole lot of research specifically for that reason.
Yeah, fantastic. So yeah, so Estonia has Estonia wins quite a lot of competitions around the world per capita, because Estonia, we've only got 1.3 million people here, which means that if we have any success here, when you then extrapolate that on a per capita basis, Estonia suddenly is leading the world. So when it comes to startup unicorns per capita, Estonia leads that in the world. And it's very much based on the Silicon Valley model. And there are a lot of Silicon Valley connected VCs who are active here in Estonia as well. So, excuse me. Maybe I go back a step and actually explain a little bit about the ecosystem here in Estonia, where it comes from.
Yes.
For many of your listeners, I guess, they won't be aware of who Estonia is or where Estonia is and so forth.
Yeah, so why don't you tell us?
Let me start with that and build out from there, yeah?
Yes, let's go from there.
I like to say that Estonia is in Viking Europe. So it's up in the far north of Europe, just underneath, across the water from Finland, Sweden, Denmark, and so forth. To the east, we have Russia. South of us, we have Baltic Lithuania and then eventually Poland. So we're on the Baltic Sea, and Estonians were traditionally Vikings, and they did some nasty stuff in their own time, to the point where the capital of Sweden actually had to move because Estonian Vikings, actually the Vikings from my partner's home island, were ransacking the city so often and actually stealing the king's daughter, I believe, that they had to move it. So then, as one of the Estonia explained to me, they got punished for that, and they were under occupation for about 700 odd years after that, something like this. Estonia was occupied for all but, I worked out all but about 35 years of the 20th century, either by the Swedes, the Germans, the Russians, whoever else in there. Spin forward to the fall of the Soviet Union in 91. Estonia regained independence. It was its second period of independence. So regained independence. And having been in the early 1930s, wealthier than its neighbors in Scandinavia, it was now the poorest country in Europe. All the infrastructure had been destroyed. It was really touch and go in a country where they hit sort of minus 30 or so, this is in Celsius, during winter. It was touch and go in a couple of years whether the main heating systems would be able to fire up. And you can imagine if the main heating systems don't fire up, then people die of cold. So it really was a dire situation in there. So then, in the middle of all this, the government said, okay, well, we know what we want to look like. And they looked again north to Finland, to Sweden, over to Germany as well. So this is our model. This is where we used to be. But realized they couldn't afford that sort of government. They didn't have the money to build out an infrastructure like that, a governmental infrastructure like that, or institutional infrastructure. Right. And also we didn't have enough people either to be able to do that, right? So they decided in the early 90s, well, let's go digital. Let's actually build the world's first digital government out there.
Really?
What was amazing is, if you think about it, back then the internet was still an idea for a lot of people around the world. And it was happening, but it was still an idea for a lot of people around the world. They played it. Sorry. They placed a big bet on that. 50% of Estonian homes didn't even have a telephone line back then, let alone internet access or anything like this. So it was a major, major gamble doing that, but it worked. I guess they were lucky in that during the Soviet era, Estonia was chosen as the sort of the center of expertise for cybernetics. So there was a very skilled workforce here who was able to pull that, skilled and visionary, who were able to pull that together. And yeah, within, well, I guess by the early 2000s, we had a fully functioning digital government here. Nowadays, actually for many years now, 99% of the government services are actually all online. And when I say online, it doesn't mean you go to a website and you fill out a website and you do all that sort of stuff. A lot of stuff just happens automatically. If a mother gives birth to a child, Estonia wants children, big time. There's problems with maintaining the sort of the natural population here. So the state automatically pays child benefits to the mothers. Well, given that they're going to pay the child benefits anyway,
yes,
why should the mother have to apply for them? There's no discretion involved in here. You're a new mother, you get child benefits. So what happens is that when the midwife enters the new child's details into the hospital system, it automatically gets pulled into the state population register. A digital identity is automatically created for that child and associated with the mother.
But your census is currently maintained.
Exactly. It's all automated. And then the Ministry of Social Affairs polls that database, which is in the middle. So yeah, it then polls the taxes and customs database to find out what the salary was of the mother before she had the child, and get the bank details as well, and then automatically starts paying the money into the bank account. This is one of the great examples we talk about, but there's a lot of stuff like this where things just happen automatically. If the government has promised to do something, or if the government is committed to doing something, and they've got all the information they need, and there's no discretion involved in the decision, just get out of the way, just do it, just automate it. And that's what happens, yeah. So I guess what I'm trying to get to here, sorry, Jennylyn, it's a long way around to explaining the part here. But the Estonians were the first to create a lot of this stuff. It was the first digital society in the world. It's the first place where a lot of these services, institutional structures, frameworks and so forth, and technologies were actually deployed, which means there's a lot of self-belief in Estonia that they can do stuff that nobody else can do or that hasn't been done before. Give them, if you want to get a good Estonian engineer, you've got to give them a hard problem. Otherwise, they're not going to bother coming to work on it, right? Because they want big challenges out there. So then a lot of these guys went off and said, well, okay, we've been building up, honing our skills within the, building up the digital society, building up digital government. And they then rolled into started building up startups. So things like Skype, things like TransferWise, Bolt and so forth, and other ones that have come off the back of that. So that then, a lot of these guys looked to Silicon Valley for inspiration. A lot of them went to Silicon Valley, lived in Silicon Valley for extended periods and have very tight connections, worked with the big VCs. So Andres and Horowitz, these sort of guys actually had Estonians in their team. Steve Jurvetson, who you may have heard of in Silicon Valley, I think one of the big backers of Elon Musk and so forth. Right. He's actually Estonian heritage. And so he's very tightly connected back into the Estonian ecosystem as well. So there's actually a very tight bridge between Estonia and Silicon Valley, which means a lot of the Silicon Valley thinking is also here, has been sort of imported into Estonia.
I love that.
The other one is Dave McClure. You must have heard of him from 500 Startups, yeah?
Right.
Many years ago, he pushed out as a tweet or a Facebook post or something talking about the Estonian mafia. He was talking about the Estonian teams in Silicon Valley at the time. And that's just become the tag for a lot of the stuff that's going on here with the startup world in Estonia. It's the Estonian mafia. So I should probably answer your question about whether the government finances these startups.
But I really am happy you gave us that, you gave us that little bit of history, because I did not know that about Estonia, and it's really fascinating. It tells me like the people living there are fearless. They just try things.
There is a lot of that going on. I think once you've had those initial champions, I mean, once you've actually taken on really hard challenges and solved them, you've developed an amazing skill set in the process, and you've developed this wonderful self-belief. So I guess the government was supportive early days, not accidentally, by being the sort of first customer and actually, well, not being the first customer, being the first driver of a lot of these new ideas and technology coming through, new solutions coming through. Spinning forward, what's happening now is most of the money in the system is VC money, is private VC money. But yeah, there's certainly government funds that through the European Union that are actually anchoring some of the VC funds in there. With Accelerate Estonia itself, the work that we're doing is highly R&D driven in its nature. It's very, very experimental. And so we actually use R&D grants to fund the teams. It won't fund their full experiments, their full pilots, but it'll provide them some sort of funding for the pilots.
This is awesome. Now, the government of Estonia, is the structure similar to the United States and say London? Like, do you have a president? Do you have a prime minister? I mean, what is that structure like, since you have an online sort of governing system?
Yeah, we haven't handed it over to the algorithms yet, but maybe one day. So we have a president who is yes, we have a president who is actually elected by the parliament. Yeah. And we have a parliament. It's a single house parliament with prime minister, multi-party democracy. So it's very much more in the European model of multi-party liberal democracy.
I like it. It sounds great. I mean, you are familiar with what's gone on in the US politically, I'm sure. Yep. And it got really ugly. And I watch a lot of friendships collapse around me because they had different perspectives and, different choices politically. And it was really sad. I was looking at it going, you guys are fighting over people who don't even know you. It was insane. You don't see any of that in where you live.
We do. Sadly, we do. Because there have been a lot of, if you look to our region, it's a highly contested region for influence between Western Europe, I guess the Western liberal democratic worldview, and the Russian sphere of influence. And Russia has historically been very keen to maintain instability in the region where it can,
Right.
to prevent, well, for loads and loads and loads of reasons. But there's also been a lot of political instability through the region, with some far-right autocratic parties using the same model that Trump adopted, actually even before Trump. I guess if you look to Netanyahu, if you look to Duterte in Philippines, it's the same sort of model that these guys have been using for a number of years. And I think, going back to your point about people fighting about people who don't know them, they're also fighting over people who don't even represent them, who pretend to represent them, but they've been so good at, I guess, clouding the air with disinformation that we're now, so many people are purely tribal. We don't care about facts. We don't care about even narrative anymore. It's just, I'm on that side, you're on that side, and pushing further and further apart.
It blows my mind. I wonder if they're oblivious to the impact that this is having on their personal lives and communities, or they just have to be right. I haven't been able to figure it out. I think it's different in different situations, but nonetheless, it really has a domino effect.
It does.
And when you were describing your online system of government, I was hoping that you didn't have to deal with this issue there, because
well, look, I guess you can't help it, can you? Because I need these. The government is meant to be representing the people. It's by definition, it's a social phenomenon. But the good thing, I guess, in Estonia is that whilst so we did for an extended period have one of these divisive parties, polarizing parties in a government coalition. And during that period, I guess the pace of innovation in Estonia at the public sector and government level slowed down for an extended period. Fortunately, we're back. As of earlier this year, we now have a more reform-minded, polarizing. Well, actually, the president is still polarizing, but because she was the voice of the sort of the liberal voice, and I understand, particularly if there's an American audience for your show, which there must be a massive American audience for the show. When we talk about liberal here, it means something somewhat more conservative than you're used to in the US. Although when we talk conservative here, it's far more liberal than what you'd consider to be conservative in the US, right? Right. During this period, the president almost was the voice of the opposition in Estonia. So she, I guess, alienated a lot of the supporters of the existing government and the more right-wing factions in that. Where we're at now, though, is the biggest party in Estonia is actually back in power. They're reform-minded. They're progressive. We have a female prime minister for the first time, and that's actually a very cool thing about the region here now.
Very cool.
It's all led by the leadership is run by women. So we have the prime minister and the president in Estonia are both women. The Finnish prime minister is a woman as well. Fortunately, Germany's still got Angela Merkel. Unfortunately, not for much longer, but she's there. So we still have a strong female leadership out here to push things forward. And yeah, Estonia's back.
Well, no offense, men, but when women are leading the pack, somehow things seem to work out better. I think because we are women are generally instinctive in terms of nurturing and doing what is right and fair, although it's not always true, but for most of the time it is. Did COVID affect your economy very much? Did you have a lot of COVID cases? How did it affect Estonia?
For sure, yeah. It's been an interesting experience here in Estonia. Firstly, because Estonia, again, small country, so it doesn't take much to impact a wide part of the population. It's also heavily dependent on tourism, particularly from Finland, but from all over the world. Tallinn in particular, which is the capital and has, I guess, half the population of the country. The economy is very heavily, not solely, but heavily dependent on tourism. And obviously that died. So that was a massive hit. I actually live in the middle of the old town here in Tallinn, and it was surreal just walking around the streets here and finding them empty. The last time I'd seen them as empty as this was in the mid-90s, in the really early hours of the morning when everybody had gone to bed. That was the last time I'd seen them this empty. So that was surreal and hit the economy quite hard. And actually was one of the first times that the Estonian government it's also fiscally very conservative. They don't believe in deficit spending, but they had to go that way. They finally went that way during the COVID period just to keep the economy flying. For people like me and most of the people that I work with, we can work anywhere. As long as we've got our laptop and an internet connection, nothing changes in our work life, right? So for us, it was a lot of people had to deal, of course, with the challenges of the mental challenges of the isolation and the change and so forth. But work-wise, they're able to keep going. But we are, in fact, a small part of the economy still, a small part of the population, more importantly. Anybody who had to be physically at a desk, hotels obviously shut down, collapsed. A lot of industry, manufacturing, and also ground to halt. So it's very nasty. That was at a point when we were hitting, trying to put this into perspective here, but say 30, maybe 30, 40, 50 people per 100,000 were getting infected. At that point, so here's what got really exciting. At that point, Estonia showed how all of this experience in creating, in doing imaginative things, came to life. Because within, so I think it was a Thursday, it was a Thursday evening, last March. The Prime Minister in the evening announced a state of emergency, saying that Estonia was going into a state of emergency, going into lockdown. Because I can't remember what the numbers were, but they were like 30, 40, 50 per 100,000 in the infections. But
wow.
we didn't know how to control it. We didn't know what was happening. The infections were going like this. So they said, let's just lock this down and try to work out how to deal with it. The next morning, or that night actually, the Minister for IT sent out an email to all of his team within the ministry and said, hey, let's think about this as an opportunity. What can we do to actually take this crisis, take this big problem, and turn it into a major opportunity for Estonia to come back stronger?
I like how they think there.
It's great, isn't it? It's like, was it Churchill or somebody? Never let a good crisis go to waste.
Yes, exactly.
That was exactly it. Next day, a pitch was put to the government. If you want ideas, so a pitch was put back to the minister. If you want ideas for coming back stronger, for coming up with solutions for this and so forth, do a hackathon. That's what Estonia does. We have a hackathon. We pull everybody together who can be involved, and we start playing with ideas, and we test them over the weekend. We build prototypes. We see if they're going to work. And this is where Estonia is amazing. Within 45 minutes of the idea being put to the government was fully behind it. So it only took that turnaround. Oh, because we also said, let's do a hackathon. Let's do it online. We've never done it online before, but let's do it online. And let's do it tonight already. And literally 45 minutes, bang, they came back and said, yep, 6 hours later, the hackathon spun up. Across the weekend, it was opened by the minister. It was closed by the president. Across the weekend, we had multiple ministers, the heads of all the key decision makers from the digital side and from a lot of the ministries, actively working with Estonian teams who are trying to put together new ideas. At the end of the weekend, we had, and this doesn't sound massive, but again, in the Estonian context, we had 30 working prototypes, new prototypes, everything ranging from chatbots and this sort of stuff to just help get information disseminated, through to some guys. One team had actually built 3 different prototypes of breathing apparatus based on open source materials. They built 3 different prototypes and then chose which one they were going to put forward and went out from there. So that all happened over 48 hours. And the amazing thing is 10 of those solutions actually went live the following week. Most of them actually taken on by the government and actually deployed by the government, literally saving lives, saving jobs. And more importantly, again, telling the Estonian people, actually looking to the society and say, this is our problem. It's not something that the government is competent to handle by itself. It doesn't have the capacity. This is something new. And actually, this is your society. Let's do this together. Now, if I compare that with Australia, it's the other way around. Australia is more, well, the government should fix this. And the government is also, hey, all of this stuff is politics. You guys stay out of it. We'll take care of this. And so this is why Estonia is so exciting.
You're going to go back there and start spreading what you're doing here, there. Start that virus there. It's a good one to spread.
Agreed. There are lots of wonderful people in Australia actually trying to do exactly this. But again, this is the wonderful thing about being in a small country. Maybe contagion is the wrong word here, but ideas can spread. A good idea can spread and be acted on very, very quickly.
But why is
so that was the bonus of COVID, I guess, the upside of COVID.
But somehow the bad ones spread more and the good ones like this remain a top secret until I have an interview with Calum.
So, Jennylyn, we have to be vigilant. We have to keep pushing these ideas and actually making sure that people are connected and can make them happen.
I know, and the thing is, you're so right. I saw some of what you described going on in Australia here too. People blame the government for everything, right? Like, I know that our governor here in California got a lot of backlash because he closed the businesses down. It's very difficult to be a politician because everybody's expecting something different from this one person. So there's absolutely no way to please everyone. But I like what you guys did in a moment of crisis. You pulled your heads together and look at the innovation that's been born out of this. So you didn't just sit back and do nothing and complain and think, oh, why is this happening? The world is ending.
Exactly. And you know what? Again, so I'm, as you'll understand, I'm quite passionate about what Estonia does and can do and what it's done in the past as a model, as an example for the rest of the world. Particularly the region and also lots of small and developing countries around the world who see themselves where Estonia was 30 years ago to work out how to go forward. What was, again, something that we hadn't anticipated with this is one of the leaders of that hackathon, Kaisa, she then, although everybody was exhausted, she then wrote up a playbook and shared that. We'd also had people from Poland and Latvia and Sweden and so forth actually within our networks participating in that hackathon. Literally, I think we finished here on the Sunday. On Tuesday, Latvia launched their equivalent using that playbook, but also improving upon it. Poland did the same. Germany launched a few days later and they reached something like 45,000 people actually joined their event. Mainly in Germany, but from around the world, again, collaborating on it. Over the following 6 weeks, 70 countries around the world actually pulled that handbook and actually did their own versions of this Hack the Crisis hackathon event in different names and so forth. And so Estonia was able to inspire a lot of this stuff. And it's not that the idea itself was particularly unique. It was just like, this is how you do it. You can do it. So there's actually a model there that says you can actually do it and just take what's useful and build from there. But also, I think what was very cool is because the Estonian government was so heavily involved in the one here, that at least regionally, the regional governments felt pressure to also be there. So you would have seen in Latvia and Poland and some others, also the presidents got involved to say they were part of it. Unfortunately, as it got further out, the governments were less and less involved. Like, for example, the event in Australia, maybe even the event in New Zealand, I think the governments were less involved. And so it didn't have that same impact with the solutions that came out. But what it did do again is it convinced people, individuals, that they could actually do something, that they weren't powerless. That he was okay, a hackathon may not be the end of the world. It may not be the solution,
Yeah.
but it convinced them that they had the potential to test and to try something with people from elsewhere. So where it actually ended up was obviously India did a massive version of the same event. And then the following week, there was something called the Global Hack, where we had, I think it was 12,000 people came together from all across the world, 100 plus countries, 12,000 people, 48 plus hours. You can imagine the organization of the different time zones and coordinating everything that was going on.
And it started with you guys.
Well, it started here, but it was just a little spark. But again, people saw Estonia and say, well, hey, Estonia's come up with a new idea. Let's copy it and hopefully improve on it. And they did improve on it. So it's very exciting stuff.
That must make you guys feel good about yourselves, you know, because you are a small country. But you see, I heard this saying when I was growing up, a little axe can cut down a big tree. This is a great example of this, because I truly believe life is 10% what happens and 90% what you do with it. And so I love how you think. I love what is appearing like a great camaraderie between the natives of the country and the government. And I think if we had more of this in the world, we would have a much better world. So maybe this is the next thing you guys can spread, is how to develop this camaraderie with your government. You cannot expect perfect government because there are no perfect people. But my humble opinion is to try to make the best of what you have and work with what you have instead of fighting against it. Just my little humble opinion.
Why do you think that doesn't happen already? Why do you think there isn't that?
Because I think too many egos are at play all over the world, in government, with people. And egos, I think, force people to believe that their beliefs are correct and right. And so they try to impose it on other people instead of embracing other people's opinions. I started a second show in parallel with this one, and I called it Diversity Matters. And one of my panelists was from Australia, and I really loved her. And I discontinued it because when we started it, the agreement was it would be a safe platform for us to agree to disagree. And early in the game, I thought that that's not possible, because there are those people who really believe what they believe is it, and they don't have any patience with other people's beliefs. I have my own belief system. My philosophy doesn't line up with half the people I know, but I am open to listening to what they believe and watching how it's benefiting their lives. And it's changed me significantly. So my belief structure has been shattered many different times because I'm open. And I think that's the problem, in answer to your question. Why do you think? Same question.
Actually, when you said that your belief systems have been shattered multiple times, that's fantastic, isn't it?
Yes.
That grows you as a person.
Of course.
It makes life far more exciting.
Because of that. I'm the woman that I am today because of that. If I remained rigid and stuck in my beliefs, which half of them were really out there.
I'd actually like to hear those at some point. That could be quite interesting. Going back to the separation between the game of politics and the rest of society out there, it's actually something I was actually thinking a lot about earlier on. That there seems to be a lack of participation by society as a whole. And maybe this is unfair because I see a very small part of the world from here. But it does feel like there's a general lack of participation in these institutions and in the way society works by society members. And I don't know whether this was by design or not, but it seems to be increasingly the case that a lot of politicians, established power, and maybe the established powers who are then using the politicians out there. And I'm going to sound like a hell of a conspiracy theorist now, I know. But there's that they have, people don't feel that they have the power to influence what happens at the political level. So yes, we have elections every X period, but then we have politicians and their supporters who are screaming that the election's unfair. The elections don't represent the popular will, right? So people lose faith in that. They generally feel they don't actually have the capacity to, or capability to actually influence the decisions and the way things are run, right? And then they get lazy and say, well, okay, I'm going to make it simple. I'll just follow whatever tribe I'm part of. And that might be a political allegiance, it might be an ethnic, a socio-political, or socioeconomic allegiance. Could be a sports team or whatever that you follow and say, okay, well, that's my view of the world. And I'm just going to, people need to simplify the world into some sort of narrative that gives them a sense of control of what they're doing, right? And then they start looking at the facts. They stop actually saying, well, is what he or she said true? At the same time, you've got the established powers, too many of them who are deliberately making it harder and harder to find the truth, harder and harder to find the facts. And so creating more and more distrust in the information that's out there. Now, what a genuine leadership should be doing, if they're seeing that weakening in participation, they should actually be investing into increasing that participation by, instead of distracting people with scandals, with, I think Berlusconi was famous for distracting the Italian population with soft porn on TV to try and keep a lot of people busy with other things, or Trumpian style big scandals that get them talking about that. And this is happening in Australia as well, right? So instead of doing that, a responsible leadership would actually be getting people engaged in, from a young age, developing their ability to be reflective, to think critically, to actually look for the truth and actually be supporting that. But that doesn't, whilst that's a democratic ideal, that doesn't support the established power and power structures. So somehow we've got to get back to that. And the media, journalists, newspapers and so forth, they're fundamental to this. They're fundamental to helping us hold governments to account, give us that, that range of views based on fact, based on truth, because it's, and the same fact can be interpreted legitimately in different ways, and that's okay. Give us that range of opinion, but don't take us off into la la land, which is where they've gone at the moment.
Well, I think in the end, it comes back to us, the consumer, because what they're doing is they're looking to create sensation, because that's what gets them what they want, which are the views, which lines their pockets. So their agenda is not about necessarily the facts, which is one of the reasons that during the COVID, I decided to do a series of interviews around the world, which I did. I interviewed people in China, Iran, and we talked, and some in Paris as well. Mexico City, I spoke with the physicians that were on the ground treating COVID patients, because you couldn't depend on what was being reported on mainstream media. So I went directly to the source to get the whatever facts I could get. And
that must have been intense.
It was. And, you know, I produced, I think, over 200 interviews in a year around the world.
Did you sleep at all?
Where were you?
I was here jumping up and down. You just weren't looking.
You were doing hackathons, but you know
Something
what?
like this, yeah.
You were adding your value, right? And I feel like if we could all look for ways to add value, instead of buying in and paying into sensation, we need to change the world. We need more unity. Otherwise, we're going to keep going downhill, and we're going to have pockets of change, innovation, and growth, like is coming out of Estonia under you and your brilliant minds. And I love that even though you're such a small country, you're making such a huge difference in the world. And we need to we need to share this more. which means we have to do a segment 2 because we're out of time.
Oh, okay. Let's do
Would
that.
you be up for it?
Of course. As you can hear, I love telling the Estonian story because I'm still so excited by it. So excited by the story, excited by the people here.
So I hope that you're sharing this story with the people in Australia, because maybe they can see that you have a proven plan of success that they can implement somehow.
Well, do you know what? And maybe this is a longer discussion, but I think, so we talk a lot with Australia. Obviously, I do what I can to try and get into Australian minds out there. And there are lots of wonderful people who get it, who are trying to make change, who are just, they're running against a brick wall the whole time. It's really nasty. But as Australia, what I get told often is that, particularly if we're talking about digital government and what Australia can take from Estonia, I often get told that actually Australia looks to Singapore, rather. Singapore's closer, because Singapore is the other shining example of what can be done. But we use very different models, because the social and political models are very different, right? So here in Estonia, Northern European liberal democracy, Singapore is the control is centralized. So the data structures, the digital government structures reflect those different models. Now, Australia is, on paper, a Western liberal democracy with decentralized distributed power. So actually, it really should be looking to the European models for inspiration, or developing its own, rather than looking to models that reflect different political structures. But yes, if we're out of time, I think it's a much longer discussion about where we get our inspiration
We'll talk
from.
about it in our next interview. But before I wrap, what do you want to leave with my viewers? I always give everyone a chance to do this.
Ooh. I think the most important thing is that we can have impact, we can change the world. It's just by getting creative and finding out other people who have the skills that we're missing or can somehow support us to do that. The platforms are there, the people are there. Don't wait for something to come to you, but rather find the model, like a hackathon that's out there. Jump in. You can connect with strangers from all across the world and build totally unique solutions.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Calum. I'm so happy we've done this. I've really enjoyed it and hope you have too.
Thank you very much, Jennylyn. Really appreciate it.
Sure, we'll do it again. And thank you so much for watching Conversations with Jennylyn. When a conversation is all you need to be inspired, we are not idealists. We are not looking for an ideal, perfect world. We're just looking for change. And I'm sure Calum and I agree on this. The world needs change for the better. So every one of us can play a part in that. And I will be bringing him back soon. Thank you for continuing to watch my show, and I will see you next time with another inspiring person.
Broadcasting from Silicon Valley, California, this is Conversations with Jennylyn.